Sophie Cunningham got hit across the face on a breakaway layup and somehow still finished the play. Seconds later, DiJonai Carrington was ejected with a flagrant 2. But then something happened that nobody expected. The Chicago crowd started chanting Sophie Cunningham's name, and that was only the beginning. What happened after the ejection, what Indiana did in the middle of all that chaos, and what Sophie Cunningham said afterward are the real reasons this story kept growing. And by the end of the night, the Fever didn't just survive the drama, they looked like a team that is learning how to win through it. With a few minutes left in the first quarter, Cunningham leaked out in transition with nothing but open floor ahead of her. It looked like an easy 2 points. Then Carrington came flying in from behind and made hard contact up high, catching Cunningham across the face and neck as she went up. It was the kind of play that instantly changes the temperature in the building. Sophie hit the floor hard, came up bleeding, and still completed the layup. Then she knocked down the free throw. That part matters. In the middle of a dangerous sequence, she still finished the possession. Once the officials reviewed it, the decision became clear. The contact was high around Cunningham's head and neck area, which is why the foul was upgraded to a flagrant 2. Carrington was ejected. But the ejection itself wasn't what made this moment explode. What happened inside the arena afterward was, the arm comes across horizontally, high, and forcefully. That's why so many people reacted the way they did in real time, not because the contact was hard, but because it looked reckless. Then came the part nobody expected. This happened in Chicago at a Sky home game with a home crowd in the building. But after Carrington got tossed, that same crowd started chanting Sophie Cunningham's name. That tells you everything about how the moment was landing in the arena. Fans will defend physical play. Fans will defend emotional play. Home fans especially will give their own players the benefit of the doubt. But when a home crowd flips like that, it usually means the line was obvious even in the moment. And that is also why the conversation immediately moved past just one foul and toward a bigger question. Was this simply a player losing control for one possession, or was it part of a larger pattern? That question didn't come out of nowhere. Almost immediately, fans started connecting this incident to earlier controversies involving Carrington. Fair or not, that changed how people viewed the foul. Suddenly, this wasn't just about one play, it was about whether this was another example of a bigger pattern. And that is when the story started moving beyond the basketball court. But the moment that really poured gasoline on the fire came after the ejection. A hard foul and an automatic toss would have been enough to dominate the conversation on their own. Instead, the online reaction pushed the story into an entirely different lane. Rather than letting the play speak for itself, Carrington's post after the ejection gave fans and media another angle to fight over almost immediately. And that is when the story stopped being only about officiating and started becoming about image, accountability, and what the league might do next. That shift matters because once a controversy spills beyond the court, it tends to last longer. A foul can fade by the next morning, a bigger narrative usually doesn't. But while everyone was arguing about the foul, Indiana was doing something completely different. They were winning the game. And that's where Caitlin Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, and Aliyah Boston took over. Early on, the Fever came out sharp. They opened the game on an 8-0 run. And even though Chicago stayed close for a while, Indiana never really lost its structure. The Sky actually held a narrow lead after the first quarter, which is important because it means the ejection itself did not instantly swing the game. Indiana had to go take it. And that happened in the second quarter. The Fever outscored Chicago 31-19 in that period and started to separate because their offense looked composed, balanced, and deliberate. Instead of getting dragged into the emotion of the game, they settled in and played cleaner basketball. That's when Caitlin Clark started to take over. Clark finished with 26 points and 11 assists, and what stood out most was how under control she looked once Indiana found rhythm. She was creating shots for others, spacing the floor and punishing Chicago every time the defense lost shape for even a second. Every time Chicago looked ready to swing the momentum, Clark helped Indiana answer. That's what top guards do. They don't just put up numbers, they stop momentum from flipping. Kelsey Mitchell was just as important. She dropped 27 points and gave Indiana the exact kind of secondary scoring punch that makes this team dangerous. When Clark draws attention, Mitchell can punish you. When Clark gives it up early, Mitchell can finish the possession. When the game gets tight, Mitchell can create without needing the entire offense to be perfect around her. That kind of guard pairing is difficult to survive over 4 quarters. Then there was Aliyah Boston, who quietly did what she so often does, stabilize everything. Boston finished with 13 points and 11 rebounds, protected the interior, and gave Indiana a reliable presence whenever the game threatened to get messy. That matters in emotionally charged games. You need players who can absorb chaos without adding to it, and Boston is one of those players. So while everyone was talking about the foul, Indiana's core was busy showing why this team feels more dangerous when it stays composed. That's the real basketball takeaway here. The final score was 90-86, but that margin almost makes the game sound shakier than Indiana's overall control actually was. Chicago made runs. Indiana answered. Chicago got energy from the moment. Indiana kept executing. Even late, when the sky made it interesting again, the Fever did not look rattled. That says a lot, because this wasn't a quiet regular season game with no pressure. This was emotional, physical, controversial, and noisy. Those are exactly the kinds of games that expose whether a team can keep its identity. Indiana did. And then came the post-game moment that may have shaped public opinion more than anything else. Sophie Cunningham took the hit, got up, played through it, and then delivered the kind of response that usually wins people over. She did not turn the press conference into a shouting match. She did not try to out-dramatize the moment. She did not sound overwhelmed by it. Instead, she sounded calm, blunt, and completely unimpressed. That was powerful because it changed the tone. Instead of escalating the story, she flattened it. Instead of sounding emotional, she sounded certain. And in sports controversies, the person who sounds the calmest often ends up sounding the most convincing. That is a huge reason why so many fans felt her response landed. The contrast became impossible to miss. One side looked reactive, the other looked composed. One side extended the controversy, the other looked ready to move on after making its point. And when that contrast lines up with the scoreboard, the story usually writes itself. That is what happened here. By the end of the night, this was no longer just a conversation about a flagrant foul. It had become a conversation about discipline, composure, image, and whether Indiana is becoming tougher in exactly the way a contender has to be. Because this team did not fold. Caitlin Clark kept creating, Kelsey Mitchell kept scoring, Aliyah Boston kept anchoring, and Sophie Cunningham took the hit, but never let the moment become bigger than the team. That may be the biggest takeaway from the entire night. The Fever didn't just survive the controversy. They showed they can stay composed when a game gets ugly, and if that continues, moments like this may end up strengthening Indiana instead of distracting them. As for Carrington, the bigger question now is whether the league sees this as one isolated play or something that deserves a closer look. Either way, Indiana walked out with the win, the momentum, and a moment that people are still talking about.